P. Diddy has been sued again, along with Jamie Foxx and Axl Rose, Russell Brand, Cuba Gooding Jr., and many more celebs. Feels like it's raining lawsuits. The media would have you believe that this is all Cassie's fault. She set off an avalanche by getting a speedy settlement, but that's not entirely true. In fact, really, that's not true at all. The real story is far more complicated than that, and the reason why is what I'm going to break down in today's video, so let's get started. The news cycle began when R&B singer Cassie filed a truly shocking, actually horrifying lawsuit against rapper and music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, and was then fueled by the almost immediate settlement that followed the filing of the lawsuit. Two events that I broke down in this video. But to quickly recap, Cassie's lawsuit claimed that P. Diddy trafficked and beat her for the duration of their relationship. The multiple lawsuits that have since followed against Combs allege very similar acts. It's all horrifying, and whether the situation is exactly as she alleged, obviously the reality was very, very bad, and he paid up so fast. When news broke of Cassie's lawsuit, a lot of eyebrows were raised. Their relationship began well over a decade ago, and it ended 5 years ago. What's the statute of limitations on a claim like Cassie's? Well, as the shortest lawyer on YouTube will tell you,
it's gonna depend. It depends. It depends. It's going to depend. It's gonna depend. It depends. It's gonna depend. It depends. It is going to depend. It's gonna depend. It depends. It depends. It depends. It depends.
Attorney Tom is right. It does depend. What a tiny human being. You could barely see him in that clip. I'm really surprised he can even stretch himself up into the frame. Now, each state has its own statute of limitations that determines the amount of time that the victim has to make a claim against someone for intentional abuse. But in a lot of states, the SOL, or statute of limitations, is only 1 year. 1 year! In some states, it can be 3 years, but in Cassie's case, we're talking about allegations older than a decade. Cassie's lawsuit was filed in New York, which brings us to the real reason that many of these lawsuits have been filed in such a short period of time, which is a basically temporary law called the Adult Survivors Act. As we all know, the Me Too movement removes some of the social stigma, as well as some of the practical difficulties that women face in pointing the finger at males who had violated them. It was not merely a social movement, especially in New York, where the state legislature passed a law that not only extended the statute of limitations for then existing claims, but even revived otherwise expired claims. Sidebar. For lawyers, the statute of limitations, or SOL, is the most normal evidentiary rule imaginable. While statutes vary, they all stand for the principle that if you wait around when you could have accused a wrongdoer of something, you will eventually lose your right to sue. There's a couple things happening here. First of all, the legal system simply wants people to bring their claims as fast as they can. Every situation is different, but generally speaking, if you're the victim of an intentional tort, imagine you get punched in the face, you'll usually get 1 year to sue. But if you slip and fall in a wet spot in a store, you might get up to 3 years to sue. And if you have a contract in writing and it's breached, you might have up to 5 years to sue. Of course, every situation is different, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't remind you to run, don't walk, to hire an attorney if you think you have a claim. And if you need some free advice, my number is 501-500-5339, and you can text me. Actually, me, right now. Oh my word, I love it. When they put the number on the screen, it makes me feel alive. Wait, where was I? These statutes are very real. For civil claims, they exist everywhere at all times. And once you miss out, there's no going back, unless somehow there is. See, the statute of limitations are figments of the imagination of state legislatures, unless you're talking about federal court, in which case they exist because the House and the Senate agreed on something, which means that although they're very arbitrary, they're also still very real. The reasons that SOLs exist is to give finality to disputes. If you have a car wreck, you basically need a deadline to sue by, or else it just lingers out there forever. And the amount of time that you're allowed to sue is more or less depending on the quality of the evidence. And that's why written agreements are often given 5 years to sue over in the event of a breach. But many other claims have far less time allowed for them. There's literally books and books and books written by and for lawyers about these deadlines. And of course, there are exceptions, like if you're a child when you're injured or you have your rights violated, or if you're subject to certain disabilities. And as weird as it may be, these arbitrary deadlines can just be changed willy-nilly by the legislatures. Now, the wildest example of that happening is the Camp Lejeune litigation, which, if you're in America and you don't live under a rock, you already know is a type of claim that you can make against the US government, at least for the next 9 months or so, for certain types of claims dating back to the 1950s, literally 70 years back, which is so crazy, for certain illnesses and deaths caused by polluted water at a U.S. military base in North Carolina. And the New York legislature decided to open up the statute of limitations for certain victims of certain types of assaults for a period of time. Now, the old deadline for each person was related to the date of the alleged event, but the new deadline was simply November 23rd, 2023. And the most predictable, like field of dreams situation, if you build it, they will come. If you reopen the SOL, the lawsuits will come. And they did, lots of them. And not just against famous people, but plenty of famous people, for sure. So we've talked about how Cassie's lawsuit and all the other abuse lawsuits against celebrities, politicians, and more were made possible by the Adult Survivors Act, and that act ended last week. So what do survivors post November 23rd, 2023 do? Well, in short order, the victims have missed out badly. Making law is hard. It's very hard. It takes a lot of politicians expending a lot of effort to get an agreement on things that naturally people are not necessarily going to agree about. So if you were a qualifying victim and you could have brought a claim, and if your lawyer did nothing while the time passed, that means that you are SOL because of the SOL, as they say. Because SOLs are created by statute and they aren't really issues of fairness per se, it's hard to get any relief from them, aka ignorance of the law is no excuse. Or,
I was in an accident on the way to the courthouse when I was gonna file my claim.
look, that excuse is probably not gonna work. But I gotta warn you, you shouldn't expect to get a bunch of dirty laundry aired out in connection with these claims against the famous people. As you likely already know, around 98% of all lawsuits settle. But claims like these under the Adult Survivor Act, these claims are so emotionally taxing for the victim, which is a reason to settle, and so potentially humiliating for the aggressor, which is a reason to settle. It means that we can expect that many, if not all of these claims will be settled confidentially without much of any explanation to you and me, the public. So all of this is to say that while Cassie's lawsuit definitely contributed to the influx of lawsuits in the sense that it brought the media spotlight to the Adult Survivors Act, the actual reason is that the act was set to end, so victims were spurred into action. And now it's time in the video where I want you to be spurred into action. Drop your pro se opinion down below in the comments and give me your thoughts on the Adult Survivors Act and the flood of lawsuits that came with its expiration. And make sure that you stick around and check out these videos right here, or just hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, and YouTube will let you know the next time that my post is up, which I promise you will be very soon, and I will see you then. Goodbye.